And we're live. So welcome again to virtual Genealogy Wednesdays. This is Preserving Your Family History with me, Angela Wolf. I'm the reference librarian here at Laramie County Library. Elaine Hayes, our genealogy and special collections librarian, is also here with us today to answer any questions that we have and to drive our Zoom meeting while I do all the talking. So if you have questions at any point, or if I talk too fast, can everyone hear me okay? Is this a good volume? Okay, great, thank you. So we'll just start the screen sharing. And if I go too fast, or if you have questions, just pop your hand up or type into the chat, or just unmute yourself and shout at me and say, whoa, stop. Too much, too fast. So just let me know. Screen share. Share. To move that. Trying to figure out how to make it display. Bear with me. Slideshow, there we go. And sorry, this looks a little different on this tablet than it did on my computer when I practiced. You can practice as much as you want, but you know how it goes from the beginning. There we go. And there you go. Does it look right for you all? Okay, lovely. Okay, so genealogy. This is a class that I was happy to create out of my experiences as a special collections assistant, as a learner from Elaine and her awesome tutelage. My background is with preservation and digitization. I began learning about it in college at the American Heritage Center. They have a rare books library there called the Toppin Rare Books Library. And I learned a lot about old, wonderful old things and how to save them for the future. And that just became a passion of mine. So I want to share a little bit of that with you today in regards to using it to save your genealogy, family history, and anything that you might have had passed down to you and want to pass down after you. So this class is going to take us through the basic principles of preservation. We'll talk about, we're going to break it down into something easy, easy to remember. So 3 item types and 3 goals for each. So we're going to go with all of the rules of 3s. There we go. And at the end, we'll have 3 tips to take away to wrap it all up nice and pretty. So we'll talk about the things to break down. 3 different types of things. We're going to start with paper, because most of us have paper files or documents or things that we want to save as files, or things that we started researching using paper, especially in genealogy. You get a lot of handouts and worksheets and printables, things that you've printed out that you might want to save. Some of those things aren't very high quality, and we'll get to how we can save things like that here in a bit. But paper is our first group of types of items. Next, we have significant objects, and those are the things that I was talking about that might have been handed down to you. Family Bibles are often something you want to keep. They've been passed down since a couple 100 years ago, furniture, baby clothes, all sorts of things, all these objects that we want to save. And I'm going to include photographs in this section because photographs are much more than just paper. They're definitely a different animal than paper. So we're going to bunch them together with significant objects. And we'll talk about how to preserve those types of things, kind of like slides or home film. We'll kind of group those together. And then finally, our last group of objects or items will be digital items. So more and more genealogy today is done digitally. Documents that you get emailed to you, things that are digitized, something that got scanned and sent to you via email. We'll talk about the best way to save those and prevent them from getting lost in the future. So for each of these 3 types of items, our goal is to practice techniques on preserving the paper, preserving the objects, and the digital items. And for that, we're going to go off of this definition of preservation and just keep it really simple. So 1, the definition of discipline of protecting materials by minimizing chemical and physical deterioration and damage in order to minimize the loss of information and to extend the life of cultural property. So minimizing the loss of information is number 1. Number 2, the act of keeping from harm, injury, decay, or destruction, especially through non-invasive treatments, which is my favorite part. I like non-invasive treatments. They're often also the cheapest. So number 2, keeping from harm. And then 3, preservation, to keep for some period of time, to set aside for future use. We don't keep something intending to never use it again, usually. We want to save it for the future. So number 3, we're going to set it aside. So translating those into goals for our 3 types of material, we're going to start with organization. 1, we have to minimize the loss of information by organizing it. Very simple. We can't make anything, we have to make it findable. So we organize. Findability, it's a word. Number 2 goes with stabilizing. So we're going to keep things from harm by stabilizing them. Our goal for all 3 of these types of materials, stabilizing through non-invasive treatments is our best course of action. But if you want to go deeper into it, we'll talk about how to do that as some options. And 3, to store, to set aside for future use. We'll tell you a little bit about best practices on storing things, storing paper, storing objects, and storing digital items. Okay, organize, stabilize, and store. Those are our 3 goals. We're going to keep things in 3s. Minimizing the loss of information, keeping from harm, and set aside for future use. For paper, special objects, and digitals. So organizing, like I said, findability is the key. If you can't find it, it's no use to you. If you have a stack of papers, it's not useful. It's just a stack of papers, not having anything that you can find. So minimizing the loss of information. If you have a file named, a digital file in your folders named KIC00421, whatever, that's not useful. You don't know what that is without opening it up. So we're going to talk about organizing and making things useful. And that kind of information is also called metadata. Metadata is a jargony word that I really like. It's called data about data. So information about information. So it's how to make something findable. So let's start with paper and organization methods for your printed things. So if you have hanging files or drawers full of binders, if they're color coded or they alphabetical by name, will your future users, anyone just walking up to it, will they be able to find things? And that's what we want to keep in mind, is how someone completely new to all of this, will they be able to find anything? Will they be able to use it? Are they going to be familiar with genealogy, or does there need to be a map or something? Have you ever wished that you could find things easier? Maybe get rid of paper copies and make things digital. Maybe it's time to digitize or get rid of anything that you're not using. Keeping things forever isn't very useful either if it's just going to lay around. So weeding things out, deciding if you want to digitize or keep your paper files, all keeping in mind of who your future user is going to be. Is it going to be easier for them to find digital files, or a mixture of both? In the handouts, there's a really great interview on downsizing with her name is Amy J. Crow, and she's got a really good interview with some really practical tips on deciding if it's digitizing time and how to start doing that with all of your papers. A very easy transition to make, the way she says. The way her tips, she has some good tips. So that was Amy J. Crow, and that's a YouTube video in your handouts. Organizing your significant objects is a little bit trickier. How do you keep those histories with your heirlooms? How do you keep grandma's story of how she got this piano with the actual piano? I've seen a few different things, including sticky notes inside drawers and things taped to undersides of furniture. And that's, if it works, if it stays, then great, as long as it doesn't get lost. And also if it doesn't do any damage. Scotch tape, probably not the best idea. It's gonna probably ruin something. But there are different ways to attach things in unobtrusive ways. If you wanna keep something, a sticky note or a laminated little story tied to the leg of a table or a buffet or something. And I'm thinking a lot of furniture. But getting those stories written down and starting with what you know is one of the first rules in genealogy in general. Asking, what do you remember about this item? What can I keep with it? And maybe digitize it also in a way that you can keep everything together in like a document. I've taken pictures of a few things here in a couple examples, and shown you, I'll show you here in a second, how I've attached or have seen things attached to them. But I also have a file that I've made pictures and written the stories down in my own files. Think of it as an inventory of memories with the object. It's not weird to have a little note in your silverware drawer, just tell you how that silverware is your great grandmother's or whatever. It probably will stay there in that drawer until it gets moved. So here's an example. Come on. There we go. So this is one of my mother-in-law's great grandmother's mantle clocks. So it was, I think, made in Germany, and they brought it by covered wagon or whatever, and it lived in Nebraska for a long time. And it was on a mantle in one of the sod houses in southern Nebraska near Colorado. I had to write all that or have my mother-in-law write it all down. And she ended up scotch taping it to the inside of the back panel. And I'm like, better than nothing. At least the story's still with it. And I typed up the story, took the pictures, and put it all in a file folder. It's all together, and the story hopefully won't get separated. The next one is kind of fun. This example is of, oops, wrong way. There we go. This is an example of a research project. They had an item and they didn't have any information about it. So you can kind of have some fun if you have a little information to go off of, learning about the items that you have. It's a little bit of a sleuthy mystery detective feeling when you have just a name and maybe a date to go off of. Luckily, this had some more information. It was a fire department retirement gift. It had the year and the name and the place. So this is a Cheyenne pioneer that we learned all sorts of about using our, like a lot of digital resources, our newspaper project from the state library. They have digitized newspapers from 1860s to 1920s. And it's all searchable by keyword search. It's really an amazing resource, as well as Find a Grave. Found a grave for this gentleman who owned the watch and put it all into a document and kept all the pictures. And it's a nice little research project to go with the actual item. So organizing stories can be kind of fun and an interesting little rabbit holes to go down, as long as it all gets saved and put together. Now for our digital items, do you have files labeled KC 102 3000 XYZ, whatever? It probably is going to be best to start locating everything and putting things into files. There's a handout about naming files as well as nesting files. Subfolders are practically infinite. It's not, but there's like 40 different levels that you can put into subfolders. So you had like one whole family branch in one folder and just subfolder all the different generations or anything. So by being able to create a findable and searchable set of data, of files, will be much more effective than having things all over the place. So organization and digital items is can be tricky, but once you know some easy tricks and a couple of, I guess, best practices by utilizing those subfolders and file naming recipes. I forget the word. Anyway, there's a handout that can show you some of the best ways to name your discs and to save things in a certain way by naming them. Let's see, did I forget anything? Are there any questions about organizing things right now? Or step one for all three of our different types of material, paper, objects, and digitals?
I've got a question.
Sure.
What seems to be my problem with digital stuff, you know, being an older guy, is, and especially with photos, sometimes when you take a photo with, whether it's a camera or a phone or whatever it may be,
Mhm.
sometimes it saves it in a format that something doesn't recognize anymore.
Mhm.
So is
Yes,
there some way to save that so it's always recognized?
that's going to be a question for when we're storing things. So once you have a file and a file type, we'll talk about saving things in a way that they migrate so that they don't get outdated. Because it sounds like maybe that's what's happening. That are they really very old photos? Um,
Some of the things that I've done, over the years is I've taken, like a cell phone, and I've taken a digital picture of an old copy that
mhm.
maybe my folks had or somebody else had.
Okay,
So, it was taken that way.
okay. So maybe when we get to the third goal for digitals, let's see if I answer your question about migration and storage.
Okay,
Okay,
sure.
so let's get there because I think that's where that question fits. Um, but that's about it for organizing. Just need to know where everything is, decide what you need to keep, make sure it's findable, um, and keep everything together for any of these paper special objects or digital files. It's pretty much the gist of organization for all of these. So the next step is to stabilize. So organization was to make everything, make sure we don't lose anything, to preserve in order to um, make sure nothing is lost. The next step was to stabilize and keep from harm. So stabilizing for paper objects and digitals. We're going to talk about buffers, acid-free things for paper, keeping objects together, binding them, keeping them safe, stabilizing. And digitals, that's going to be a little bit, we're going to touch on the migration for stabilizing digital files. So first we organized. Now that we have an idea of what original paper objects are worth keeping, and we've weeded duplicate papers, unnecessary copies, maybe decided to go digital, then we can think about stabilizing what's left and organizing things in ways that they won't be damaged further. So recognizing damage, some of the things you have might be clippings, newspaper clippings, or documents. Let's talk about the difference between a dollar bill and a piece of newsprint that you've clipped out. What happens when you wash a dollar bill in your pocket? It just gets clean. It stays together. It's maybe a little stiff from drying out, but it's not going to fall apart. You can still use it. And that's because it's made with 100% cotton rag turned into paper out of cotton. It's basically cloth, but it's a high quality paper. Well, newsprint, if you wash it, there's no coming back. It will just turn to fuzz in your pocket or the dryer. And that's the difference between the quality of different kinds of paper and the uses of the acids in the creating process in the production of paper. So newsprint for genealogists and historians is really fun. We really like things like newsprint. We also like things like ticket stubs or postcards. And this is why, this is your bonus word for today, ephemera. The ephemeral things that we use day to day and that they used day to day in history all the way back to, there's always been ephemera. This is, sorry, I skipped this. Acidity, this is just telling you how how the acidity scale works. So acidic, neutral, and base, just quick reminder of science. But ephemera, things like this have so much character and information about the person who had them. So a postcard is going to have a stamp. It's going to tell you where it's from. It's going to tell you the year that it was posted, who these two people were talking to, and about their relationship. Ephemeral things that were never meant to be kept. And that's the whole point. Things that weren't produced to be savable. Newsprint, it's supposed to be thrown out with the trash or wrap your fish in the next day. It's not meant to be saved. And so it's not printed on good paper. It's not meant to be saved, but it's great information for genealogists and for historians. We love it. Tickets, receipts, all those things that we just throw away tell us a lot about people's daily lives. And that can be really fun when you have some history behind it. So if you have things like that, and you have this acidic stuff that is just brittle and falling apart, and you want to save it, there's a couple of things you can do. But this is something that you don't want to do in this next slide. So having everything stacked up together. Acid migration, you can see how the transfer of acid from this really acidic piece of paper has transferred onto the less acidic paper. And you can even see the little outline of the paper clip where it's just embedded itself. All that acid is just leaching across. So this is when you might think about putting things into polyethylene protective sleeves if it's really important. Keeping pieces of the same acidity together if it looks like it's the same color of brown and it's not going to leach itself onto each other, but putting something dark yellow next to a bright white thing, that might be asking for acid migration. So when you're looking through things and you can see the polyethylene and polypropylene and all the polys that are, like page protectors and things like buffered acid-free paper, like tissue paper, kind of, is really useful for weaving into piles of things that you want to save or putting into sleeves and encapsulating them. A lot of people ask about laminating. The thing about laminating is it's not reversible. You're melting that plastic onto both sides of a piece of paper, and it will save it, but there's no going back. So, and it's kind of expensive. But that's the thing that's the only problem I have with laminating, even though it's super fun for kids' art projects. It's like that forever. And so just a word of warning and a reminder that non-invasive treatments, things that are reversible, are usually cheaper and better for the object. So after that, separation is for their own good, preventing the acid migration. It's not hard to keep things that are special enough in a special place. Of course, like paper files, you can use acid-free folders. Our copy paper is not super high quality. It's getting better, but it's still going to age, and it's going to show its age here in probably a decade. So think about how much you need all your paper files and how you want to put them into folders and how you're organizing them. Maybe get acid-free or buffered folders or page protectors, things like that. So now we're on to significant objects. Excuse me. So stabilizing things and objects can also be fairly inexpensive if you just want to preserve them in the shape that they're in. And I'm thinking about a good example is your family Bible. It's usually really brittle because it was probably made with not the best paper. Maybe the leather is drying out and the binding's cracked and the glue is just flaking off. To preserve it, to stabilize it in the condition it's in, all you have to do is keep all the pieces together. And usually that's by putting it in a box or binding it with cotton, acid-free, pure cotton tape. It's like a little ribbon. I have a picture of it in the next slide. The difference between preservation, conservation is the next step up. Conservation would be like taking it to a book doctor and saying, can you put all these pieces back together? So he'll put new glue on the binding. He'll put the pieces of pages back together. And that'll be about it. The next step up is restoration. So if you have a really, really fancy, beautiful Bible that you want to make sparkling new again, you'll take it to another book artist or book doctor and have him reback the spine with fresh new leather. Maybe touch up some of the illustrations inside, or it's just going above and beyond and making it look like it's brand new from the time that it was from. And that's restoring it to its original state in the best way that you can. That gets expensive. So conservation can be expensive. Just getting it to be back in one piece can be expensive, but preservation, keeping it in its state, but making sure it's all safe is usually good enough and also cheap. And sometimes it's preferable because you're going to lose some of its history by restoring it. You might lose a couple of markings or something with brand new leather that maybe had your grandmother's date on. I don't know. You're going to lose some of that history with the restoration process. Otherwise, sometimes in cases of like China, use is the best method for stabilization. Using that end table from your grandmother or the piano that your mom learned to play on, using it, it builds that relationship and it keeps your focus on it so that it's always in good condition. You're always careful with it, because you're living with it and using it. And it keeps rewriting that family history. It keeps it going. So use is a really good way to stabilize and make your significant objects even more significant. Here is a picture of the difference between preservation and the other steps of conservation and restoration. So that's the cotton tape that you can use to keep objects together. And if you want to just go through the pages, you just untie it. Make sure you don't lose any pages. Use and handling of like china, objects like handmade quilts from a long time ago. My mom has a quilt. This isn't it. I couldn't find a picture of it, but they have a piece of my great grandmother's quilt from World War I. And it was an auction to help the soldiers or something. And my great grandfather won it at the auction just so he could talk to my great grandmother. And that's how they started dating or whatever they called it back in the 1920s. But what they did with it, it wasn't used anymore. It couldn't be used. It would have just fallen apart. So they did cut it up into pieces for each of the grandchildren, laminated a story and pinned it to the back of this quilt piece. And now it's a nice little wall hanging with little American flags embroidered on it. And it's just a lovely piece to remember that family story. And since it was a large quilt and there were multiple grandchildren, they all could have a piece. And that's a much more useful and memorable way to keep that history alive. So even though you had to cut it up, that's irreversible, but it is stabilized and memorable for many others. China can be used for ages. It's better if it's used, and as long as you're taking good care of it, don't put it in the dishwasher. Photographs, when we talk about using and having photographs, they're always good to have under glass. In photo albums, it's great to have information with them. So like I said, metadata, as long as you have photographs and they're organized, make sure they have the metadata with them. Usually people write on the back. Just try to make sure it's in pencil or something that's not going to push through the paper until the front so you can see it. Just as much metadata as you can get about photographs. Who is it? When was that? Whose dog is that? All those good questions that you have for your older family members. It's a fun thing to go through. It's even funner when you know the people. If you don't know who it is, it's like a file named F2735. You don't know what it is. You don't know who it is. It's not usable and it's not savable for future generations. That is lost to time. So that's important. But using and file like albums, photo albums, is kind of like filing, using acid-free or polypropylene sleeves aren't the same because they can react with the silver. Sometimes silver is used in the printing process. You can see on this example, it has tarnished because of people touching it with the oils on their hands. So always touching photographs on the edges will help preserve their life, or having very, very dry hands. But even then, it's best to keep your fingerprints off any film, including negatives or home film. So use and remembering and expanding that history is a good way to preserve and stabilize those objects. So here, let's talk about migration for digital items now. Stabilizing digital items. Migration, you can kind of think about this why animals migrate, because there's a better place that's safer for them. They just move to another place and it makes things better. So migration for digital items, you have a little bit of an older file. You open it in a little bit of a newer program. It's supposed to migrate that information and kind of update things. And then you save it again as this refreshed version of itself. So that's kind of what I was wondering, if your photos, Barry, if they needed to be opened in a certain program and saved in a different way, and then opened in another program and then resaved, so that it has that migration into something that's savable now, will need to be migrated in the future still. That's the thing about all of these things. And we'll get to that when we talk about storage, about the upkeep. So we'll get back to that. So migration also keeps things accessible, as long as you have reliable file formats, and that can be tricky with the different types of like photo file types, and also like GEDCOM type of files. So let me see if I'm on that topic yet. Not quite. That's going to be in storage. I'll talk about that in a second too. So a rule of thumb, another 1, 2, 3 rule of stabilizing digital items is keeping it in multiple copies. So 3, 2, 1, 3 copies. We'll get to the 2 and 1 in storage because they're super related. But having maybe a paper copy and a digital copy that you use, and then a stable long-term type of storage copy would work. The paper copy is cheating a little bit, but it counts for our uses because so much of what genealogy does is paper in the beginning. Let me make sure I got all my notes in here. Basically, we just want to be able to make sure we're going to be able to open that file in another 5 years. That's about the length of a digital file. Things are changing so quickly anymore. And I think it's better anymore that they know it's better than it was like in 2000 when there were so many different types of files and different types of computers that everything wasn't like standardized. I think that's a lot better now. We've had 20 years to figure out what the best file formats are. And I think that handout about file formats has some tips on that as well. The best and most stable. So you'll see at the end of a file, PDF or .exl or things like that. It'll tell you which of those are the most stable and things that should be savable for the future. So look at that handout. That's that for stabilization. Let's move on to goal number 3, storing all of our things. Unless we have questions about stabilization. And we can always come back to this at the end if you have a specific object or something that you want to ask about. Think we're good? Okay. All right, move on to storage. So after we've organized it and we've stabilized it, now we need to plan for its future. So setting aside for its future use, and maybe that includes something way in the future. We never really know, do we? So saving it for the future doesn't mean you get to forget about it, right? Even if it's out of sight, out of mind, you have to remember that you have these things that need your attention still. They're depending on you for their survival. So in long-term storage, don't let things be forgotten to obsolescence. Don't let them decay. We're saving them for a reason. We're putting all this effort in to save them. So don't forget about them. We want to make sure all of our objects are comfortable in their environment. So think about comfort. How would you want to take a nap for several decades? Do you want to be hot and dripping wet? Or would you like to be cool, dark, and dry? That's what most paper materials want. The cooler, not frozen, but cool and dark, because the sun has a lot of damaging, even light is very damaging, and dry. Moisture is awful. So cool, dark, and dry. That's the best way to take a nap. Of course. Fluctuations in that can be very uncomfortable for paper, for books, for objects, all sorts of things. But paper in particularly, it expands and contracts with the temperature and humidity. So the more it fluctuates, like in your attic, it gets really hot in the summer, maybe humid, and really cold in the winter, and maybe really dry. Those fluctuations are really bad for just about anything. that you want to save. The basement is another problematic place, prone to possible flooding, but also moist and cool at times. So if there's a place in your house that you are comfortable, that you could take a nap in, like a closet on your main level, that's going to be out of the way. If you could take a nap there, then so could your objects or your paper. And then there's another option. You can always display them. So more options and more complications, but displaying your paper objects is kind of like displaying your significant objects. And it just depends on how much you want to spend. So let's talk about objects real quick. Is it safe to use? Did you decide if you want to use it or to store it? Do you want to put it away in protective custody? Maybe in a very, very secure place, your cedar chest or someplace that's not super useful, but good for long-term safekeeping. If you want to display your objects and use them, just make sure they're also comfortable in places that aren't going to get flooded, that aren't going to be in direct sunlight without any protection. And certainly in like hot places next to a heater or a furnace vent or whatever. Think about you and your person staying there for a decade. Are you going to be comfortable there the whole time? If it's not comfortable for you, it won't be comfortable or stable for your object either. There's a couple of examples of what to do with some objects. If it's something that you're not going to use, this is a little piece of clothing, of doll's, not a doll's dress, baptism dress, maybe used once every few years for the next grandchild. This particular one doesn't look like it would be very pretty on anyone, but keeping it safe because it is so special. You can see it has bolsters underneath, clean cotton wrapping, acid-free tissue paper, and an acid-free box just to set and keep it fluffy. Rolling things or folding things aren't always the best, even though that's what we want to do with clothing or fabric. Folds wear and will just become weak and brittle. If you can bolster things and make them live without being smashed, that's the best idea. Think of how you want to take a nap. Do you want to be smashed under blankets so that you can't move or breathe? If you don't, this won't either. You want to keep things fluffy and with a little bit of room to breathe. Padded hangers and dust cloths are always a good thing for garments and things that you just want to keep clean and maybe used, once or twice every few years, or just maybe not used, but looked at or checked on and make sure things aren't eating them, if that's a possibility, moths and things. But thinking about the closet that you're putting things in, or the box or the storage space, think about the humidity and the temperature fluctuations. So that's probably the next expensive thing. But if you have even more special objects, you can display them as storage. I love preservation framing. I used to do it in a couple of different places in galleries, and I love having the story on display and safekeeping. This kind of thing, you would use UV protective glass. It bounces the UV rays back, so it won't harm what you have out, acid-free materials for display, acid-free things that don't give off gases. So there's not going to be any ghost images gassed onto the other side of the glass that sometimes you see with old photographs. And just really special display, kind of a memorial to your object, and like it tells a little story on your wall. It's a nice thing if you want to invest in that type of storage display. Any questions about storing objects before I go on to digitals? Sure, Valerie.
I was wondering about quilts and fabric.
Mhm.
Like you say, the christening gowns and a few things like that. I understand when you fold it that there's a problem sometimes. A friend of mine told me to occasionally refold it
Mhm.
in a different place so it wasn't always in the same fold. What about rolling it? So would that work also?
It would be the same idea. So if you roll it, occasionally you would want to shift that roll so that the folds, because it's going to be flattened in different places. We just want to make sure that those folds don't get refolded over and over and over so that it becomes this breaking point.
Right.
I think about it as your camping tent. The weak parts in the tent, if you fold it the same way every time, those are going to become really weak. The next time you put your tent up, it's going to tear there.
Okay. And what about when you're talking about the cloth cover? I saw the cover over the
Mhm.
hangers and such.
Mhm.
Do you have to look, I mean, this is probably a stupid question, but do you have to look specifically for acid-free cloth? Is cotton, if you got something that's like 100% cotton,
Mhm.
is that
That will
pretty
be
acceptable?
acid free on its own. That will be conservation quality. If it's just undyed cotton, that that's going to be very good quality. Um,
So you have to specifically look for that.
yeah, if it's a mix of, or if it's dyed, that's just going to add another level of
Okay.
questionability. So usually you can be pretty safe with just pure cotton. My mom has bolts of just cotton muslin for things, just 100%
Oh,
undyed, unbleached even, just natural cotton to use for
okay.
anything. Um, it's a pretty safe bet and accessible and inexpensive.
Thank you.
Yeah, we want to go on to digital items. How are we doing on time? Oh, yeah, we're doing okay on time. We're almost done. So digital objects and storage. So, like I said, the rule for 5 years can be plugged into this rule of three. So 3 copies of your digital items. And if you're cheating, you can use that paper copy as one of your copies. But ideally, 2 different types of storage media. So that can be a compact disc or a flash drive or cloud storage. We're going to talk more about that, or a solid state hard drive besides the one on your computer. So those can be 2 different types. Your working copy on your computer, 2 more, one on a flash drive so you can give it to a friend, another copy on your hard drive, your portable hard drive, or a disk. So that at least one of those can be in a separate location. So 3 copies, 2 types of storage, 1 separate location. 3, 2, 1. And that's just in case, you know, your house burns down with your laptop and your flash drive in it, you still have a separate, you have a separate option. And I prefer my separate location to be the cloud. Um, raise your hand if you're confused about the cloud. I can't see the other two. Thanks. The cloud, it's not a magical cloud in the sky. We're going to talk about it being a solid brick building. It's like a bunker full of servers with cooling units because there's just rows and rows and rows and security guards. And it's like a bank, a vault for information. That's what the cloud really is. It's not something mystical. It's not anything to be afraid of, like my aunt is afraid of the cloud. She's like, I don't know where it's going. I was like, yes, you do. It's probably somewhere like out on the prairie, like the big, if you're here in Cheyenne, the big data center that's out by the Walmart center now. That is a data storage facility. So it's the real place, very secure. I happen to have a Google Drive, and Google is so big, I know that they're probably never going to go out of business, and I don't have to worry about that. They're also very accessible all over the world. So that's my separate location backup. And here is an example of my cloud. So this is my genealogy folder. I have color-coded kind of arbitrarily. It's not super functional for anyone but me. But what is functional for anyone else are the, is it Onentafel? Is that how you say that, Elaine?
Well, that's how I say it. I don't know if that's correct.
Right.
But it might be German, so
right? It sounds German. Onentafel. So it's a year based or a number based system. And the higher the numbers get, the further back in generations they are. So I have my parents, Woods and Wolf, all the way back to 30 and 31, all the way down at Bremen Steinauer, back of several generations. So that's a fairly common file system for genealogists. And I have plugged it into my cloud system. This would be just like on my computer, and it is. I have all the same things on my computer and a separate hard drive. So I have my 3 places. The ones that I work on my computer, every once in a while, I've zoomed those all up to the cloud. I can copy and paste this whole folder straight to the cloud. I don't have to worry about storage space because I can always buy more from Google if I need to. The only other thing is I am responsible for making sure I can read the files, and that's where that migration comes in. I can upload them to the cloud, but that doesn't mean in 5 years I won't be able to download them and use them again, or 10 years. If I haven't touched them for 10 years, there's no guarantee that it will open again. So I have to stay on my toes and keep opening things and making sure the file types are up to date, even in the cloud. There are some services, they will do that for you. They will migrate your files for you, but those are expensive. It's doable, but if you're like me and you don't want to pay for things that you don't have to, just make sure you're on top of your migration and making sure you can open those files every few years, and resaving them if you need to. The only other thing that I wanted to talk about were the GEDCOM files for the ancestry and family search and the family tree types of programs, they're just kind of a special file format that might need migration more often. Just in case the family tree maker that you used, in case that goes away and doesn't get updated, you want to make sure that you don't lose any of your information. A good alternative to that, Ancestry is kind of another one of those Google type companies. It's not going anywhere, but it's also not free. What do you think, Elaine? Are types of files like what Family Tree Maker have, are those going to be pretty stable? Are they popular enough to be around for a while?
They are all GEDCOMs. That's the file type they are.
Standardized. Okay.
Yeah. So it is standardized, and nothing but a family tree software like that is going to be able to read a GEDCOM. You put it on your computer, it's, without having a program like that, it won't be able to read it. So, but you can save it as that and put it into another program, and it will be able to read it. And the GEDCOM dates back to the very first genealogy software that was developed by the LDS Church. And that's where it came, like, I don't know, 40 years ago. So a long time ago. So it's pretty stable, I think. Yeah, and you can download that into something like Ancestry or Family Search, your file.
Great. So that's transferable. That is migratable from one family tree program to the next family tree program. So it'll always be able to translate and migrate. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, and they do periodically update their software, but it's always the basics. The back, software is, I don't know, the machine language is GEDCOM. So, yeah.
Great. Good. That's a good one to remember, GEDCOM for family trees. What else do I have? Migration, keep on top of it. Does anyone have any questions about the cloud specifically? Or migration, maybe? Or different types of storage media?
Maybe like SD cards were big at one time. Is USB maybe a more favorable?
I'm really glad you asked that. So I mentioned like a thumb drive, a USB drive, memory stick. I don't recommend those for anything except working files or giving things away because they're not stable. My senior year in college, I had a memory stick with all of my work on for the semester. And it's Wyoming in the winter, and it got shocked, just static electricity, and everything was gone. It just died. So yeah, it's not stable because it's not written, it's not etched onto a disk inside. So that's what a stable memory, a solid state memory hard drive is for. So it's a hard drive outside of your computer. It's the size of a, what is it the size of? It's smaller than a deck of cards. And you can get it in, terabytes of information, or is enough to store your entire collection of everything and plus music. So that's what me and my husband have, a solid state, at least one solid state hard drive for memory that we can put in the vault, put it safe somewhere. It's portable if we need to take it somewhere, but the memory sticks, very temporary. don't depend on them. But don't be afraid to use them. Just make sure you have that as just one of your 3 copies.
Got another question.
Mhm.
My wife, Carol, has had a couple relatives that did some family tree stuff,
Mhm.
and it looks like it was done on a program or something. It looks very professional.
They're all
Mhm.
formatted the same.
Maybe I can show you a copy. I don't know if that's the preferred way to do it.
All
Sure.
the pages are formatted the same. And can you see that?
Is that upside down?
It's upside down.
Oh, okay. So it's printed out for you.
Yeah, it's actually bound. One's in a 3-ring notebook and one's bound. But
All the information is almost the same in both books.
yeah, and everything's let's see it that way. Everything is numbered and
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody put a lot of work into that.
yeah, there's a date. There's a date and page numbers. And if this is a program, a software program, we would like to find out how you get a hold of it or if it costs or doesn't cost.
You mean to get a digital copy or?
I think I might know at least an idea of what it is. And I sent you an email earlier because you emailed
yeah.
me that question.
I did. Been busy.
And I think it's probably a one of these computer software like Legacy or Family Tree Maker or something like that. And to get it to print out those kind of reports, you're going to have to pay for it. It won't be their free version. It'll be a paid version. And there may be even some add-ons if you're like going to produce like a whole book, because you can do that. They usually have a setting where all the information you've added, it will kind of print out a whole book for you, but that may even cost even extra, or it might be just, you know, something that you're going to have to print and pay for the paper or whatever to print it. But you can get print out some basic reports. Like I could have it print out my whole family tree, you know, and it might be 40 pages worth of stuff for just my family tree. And it might be, it could print out, what am I thinking of? The family group sheets for every family, you know, with the mom and dad and all their kids and, you know, and that might be 100 pages or more. It actually might be 1,000 pages, who knows? Because I've got 4,000 people in my family tree. So yeah, but those family tree programs like Family Tree Maker, Legacy, I'm trying to think of all the names of them. Generations used to be called one of them. One of them was called Generations, but they will do that sort of thing. And there are other like programs that are kind of like Publisher in Microsoft Office, and that's for like publishing a whole book, you know, of information. So yeah.
So is that something that part of the service, maybe if you do purchase some of this, that they would keep this on file forever? And maybe you can like this person that did it, would they make it accessible for Carol maybe, and she could add on to it electronically, and then, you know, like, is this information, would it be kept forever?
It depends. Usually that information is kept on your computer, but you know, like they may have done like Angie suggests and save it somewhere else too. So they also have it on, you know, in some other location in the cloud somewhere, for instance. But yeah. So yeah, if that person is still alive and you can chat with them.
One passed away and the other one we're trying to locate because we just got this idea, you know, that we might want to do it the same way.
Okay, well, we can talk about this later, you know, because and then let Angie go on.
That's a great question to think about, having a goal to to work on, and how to save it and how to see how someone else preserved all the research. So it's a good question. Hopefully they had 3 copies.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they gave everyone hard copies, which is great, but now I see a couple even errors and in
Mm.
birthdays in my family, and I would like to fix them, but I don't.
Oh, sure. Right. That's a good idea.
Okay.
Let's see. Oh, that's backwards. That's my cloud. Okay, so it looks like we've done all 3 of our material types, and we've gone through all 3 of the goals. Hopefully we have 3 tips to take away. We've organized, stabilized, and stored our paper and our special objects. We've gotten organized, stabilized, and stored. And our digitals for the most part, I think. Our takeaways here, making sure they're findable and have all their data with them. So findability and metadata, the information about that information. Keeping things together, of course, right? Minimizing the loss of information, keeping it together to stabilize, keep things safe from harm. Keeping it comfortable, but you don't get too comfortable in storage and setting aside for future use. So if we have any other specific questions, specific objects, or something I didn't go over, paper or certificates, or something that you are still wondering about, happy to dissect any specifics that you have.
Are Ziplocs good for keeping stuff in too?
What's that?
Ziplocs.
Is there acid or something?
Oh, depends on what you want to keep fresh. So Ziplocs were made for food. If you have something like a book, I would not put it in a Ziploc unless you want to keep it moist. So that's usually not something you want. Ziplocs are going to keep everything bad in. There's not going to be much breathability for it. Think about, do you want to take a nap in a Ziploc bag? So that's, if it's something like an object that you wonder about. Paper, keeping things organized like paper in Ziploc bags, that could be all right, as long as they're of a similar acidity, you know. Otherwise, you're gonna get that acid migration and things that are gonna just live in there with that paper.
I have a bug question.
Okay.
I had a family Bible, Ukrainian Bible. It was really tiny.
Yeah.
And had a little clasp on it.
Uh-huh.
And then I noticed that there were some really teeny tiny little paper
Yeah.
bugs that were eating it, and I don't
Yeah.
know. So is that something that's why the Ziploc would come to mind for me there, but
Right. So if you're worried about there being any live bugs in the book anymore, you can put it, this is kind of weird. Wouldn't put it in a Ziploc bag, but you could put it in freezer paper and put it in the freezer, and that would kill anything.
okay.
So if you're worried about anything living on it, you can put it in the freezer for a very short amount of time, just to kind of cleanse it. And then bring it out and bring it slowly back up to temperature. Take a look and make sure things are dead and brushed out. But yeah, that's a kind of thing that takes a little bit of a special treatment if there's bugs. Or mold. Mold is another one that you can freeze off without being too invasive.
But you don't want it to develop any frost. So
Yes.
that was
Mhm.
just enough time to kill the bugs and kill the mold.
Yes, exactly.
What kind of time is that usually?
2 hours, I would think.
Yeah, maybe overnight, as long as it doesn't go through a defrost cycle. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yep.
Anything else? Yeah.
I love those little Bibles with the little metal clasps on them. They're so sweet.
Yeah, it was very cool. But now I'm trying to. It was in a trunk or something, and maybe that's probably where it got the little bitty bugs.
Yep. Could be.
I have one quick question, and it came up because I was talking to someone who brought in some mementos from World War II. So they're, almost 80 years old or something
Mhm.
like that. And they had it in an album with those magnetic pages, the
Oh,
ones that
yeah.
sticky, and then the sticky that sticks on top of it, the clear pages that you lift up, but everything's sticky.
Yeah.
And I suggested that they might want to take them out of those, because I had always been told that those were not good for preservation.
They're really, really bad. That adhesive. Oh,
Yeah, they told me, oh no, these are acid free. I would say even if it's acid free, it's still sticking.
mhm.
And these were like newspaper clippings and
Yes.
ration books and things that aren't on good paper.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Anything that has a chemical that's going to be sticky can deteriorate fast. It can be on acid-free paper, and the plastic can be polyethylene, and it can be really good materials, except for that you just don't know what that adhesive is going to do in a decade. Best not to make the assumption that it's going to stay only tacky forever. Staying with the idea of non-invasive treatments, the photo corners, like old-timey, stick onto the page, then it's just you tuck the corners into the little photo corners. It's completely reversible. They're acid-free. The sticky goes onto the page and not to the object. That's what I prefer, things that you can just reverse and not worry about anything going wrong. I like photo corners.
I didn't get a chance to read those, but on the, you're talking about the polyethylene or polypropylene.
Mhm.
Are there any? Because I've seen online where they say some of the plastic things are acid free or safe for photos.
Yep, photo safe.
The archival, is that true, or are they just?
No, that should be
tell you.
something, and it's the PVA, polyvinyl acetates, stuff like that. If it's made of those things, they're more expensive. And so someone's not going to, a company's not going to pretend that something is. If it's cheap, then maybe be a little wary. But if it says archival, if it says photo safe, as long as it's not adhesive,
Okay,
you're
I'm trying to pull out my ones from my adhesive things
right.
to save them.
Right.
And be careful, because they may stick, but you can do things like use like dental floss to get them off the sticky.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And there's different ways because if you just try to pull them off, they may not come, or they may half come, which is
Okay.
even worse.
Well, okay, so I guess that's a good question, because once you pull or get them off with floss or whatever, however you get them off, is it, once you get it off the sticky, if there's any, I haven't really even tried yet, but if there's
Mhm.
sticky still on, And most of the photos that are in the sticky albums are more recent. So they're not like the old timey photos, but if they're still sticky on the back of the picture, is there any way to, or is it just safe getting it off that sticky album?
It's probably best just getting it out of the sticky album.
Okay.
If it's already started to transfer, you might be able to gently rub it off with just the oils in your fingers. As long as you're not rubbing the front of the photograph, sometimes that's enough. Or it'll just make it slightly dusty enough that it won't adhere to anything else. And that might be the best thing you can do. You wouldn't want to put Goo Gone or anything on it.
Oh yeah, no. No, that would be good.
Because sometimes just the oil in your finger will rub a little nubbin off of it
Okay.
and not be too invasive.
Okay, thanks.
You were saying that pencils might be the best thing to write on the back of a photo. Is there even
Yes.
something better than that, or do they transfer at all? Like if
Well, a soft pencil is best just so that you don't have to press hard. And then after that, of course, you don't want to put them into a stack facing, so that it does rub off the pencil onto the front of another photo. So that is something to think of, but usually, I don't know, sometimes, yeah, it's just best to not have just a stack of photos. Even
I
if
was just wondering if they were making like a special marker or something like that we should be using.
there are acid-free, soft-tipped, permanent markers. There you go. So, yeah, you'll find them in scrapbooking areas of like Michael's, and they're good. If you want to spend probably $6 for a pen or so. But yeah, anything that will stay and won't damage. I like pencil because it is semi-reversible. If you ever needed to correct something, you wouldn't have to press very hard or anything like that to erase it. But if you're sure, use the pen. Just make sure it's acid-free and archival.
I think this was about $8,
Mhm.
and it says it's photo safe and acid free and all that stuff.
Yeah, they have some pretty good stuff in the scrapbooking section at Michael's. And they have 40% off coupons, which I love. So, that's great.
Okay, well, thanks.
Yeah, looks like we're about at time. So if there's no other questions, definitely feel free to look at, there's so many websites that I got sources from. So if you have any questions about the sources, there's a bunch of tutorials and cool videos and things in your handouts. And since they're digital, you can just click on those links in that PDF. So do a little playing around and see if you have any other questions or ideas. You can email back to Elaine or Adult Services or me.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
very much.
Thanks for
Very
coming. It was fun. Thanks.
Yeah, we enjoyed it. Thank you.
Good to see you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for coming.
I'm going to stop recording.
Thanks, Elaine. That was helpful.